especially when you're talking about women who are being trafficked. So this isn't to highlight some big, vast conspiracy about a pizza parlor, but I think there needs to be questions, and I asked some questions on this topic that should be explained. There wasn't an explanation given, of course. And then other members
About
certainly asked
Pizzagate?
about UFOs. I'm sorry?
And UFOs? Like, what did you want to know about UFOs and Pizzagate?
Well, I think everybody
that
wants
would
to know
matter
about
to survivors?
UFOs. I did not ask that question, but
Welcome back to the channel. In this clip, we're going to look at a pretty chaotic interview involving Congresswoman Lauren Boebert and journalist Chris Cuomo. And honestly, it turns into one of those moments where the conversation just completely derails in real time. What starts out as a discussion about the Epstein files, transparency, and congressional oversight quickly spirals into something else entirely when Boebert begins bringing up topics like UFOs and Pizzagate during a serious discussion about the investigation. Now, to Cuomo's credit, he doesn't just sit there and let it slide. He pushes back repeatedly, especially on two key claims. First, the idea that Donald Trump has somehow been exonerated, and second, the direction the investigation is taking when lawmakers start drifting into conspiracy territory instead of focusing on the actual evidence. At one point, Cuomo literally stops the conversation and explains the difference between being exonerated and simply not being charged, which is a distinction that gets lost a lot in political debates. So what we're going to do is watch this exchange together because it really highlights how messy these conversations can get when politics, investigations, and media narratives all collide at the same time. And then once the clip finishes, I'll break down what was actually said, what the facts are around the Epstein case, and why Cuomo's pushback in this interview actually matters more than it might seem at first glance.
And yet, the Republican has not run away. The member of Congress, Lauren Boebert, joins us right now with a Democratic colleague. Remember, here on News Nation, left and right come together to be reasonable. Okay, so member of Congress, Democrat Suhas Subramaniam is here also. Now, Lauren, to be honest, okay, not only do I not care that you took the photo, but yes, I'm going to ask you and you're going to have to explain it, but I can't come at you because you were one of the champions of wanting to release this. And, you know, you've been on it from jump. You've been an advocate of it for the right reasons. So to me, you've got high ground. But what was this about? You trying to make some money on the side?
No, Chris. So I did ask permission of committee staff, and I was told that I could release a photo during the break. And we missed that break by just a few minutes. So it was a few minutes before our break. And then we quickly came together and all agreed no photos will be taken, no photos will be released. However, there were Democrats and those in the minority party that were releasing information about the hearing throughout the day. Topics that were discussed were being leaked to the media. And so there was a lot of things that were coming out of that room. But regardless, it was a photo. It was taken before the hearing had began, and it wasn't released at the break time. And now we have come to an agreement that no members or staff will take pictures in the hearing. But you're right, Chris. I have been an advocate for getting justice for the victims from the beginning, and that is why I went against my party and I forced this vote and forced the release of these files. And we are starting to see what is in them. Unfortunately, we don't see enough. And that is part of why we are having this bipartisan deposition. Democrats and Republicans put forward a subpoena for the Clintons, and Democrats and Republicans voted to hold them in contempt of Congress when they failed to uphold that subpoena. So here we are today, and tomorrow I think will be hopefully more enlightening once we have former President Bill Clinton before us.
I'm still trying to get past the fact that you gave it to Benny Johnson. I mean, of all the people to feed. All right, but I'll let it go. Let me ask you something, Lauren, and then I want to bring Suhas in on the same question. Why is it a closed-door deposition? Why isn't it open? We all know, all three of us know, the only way to repair trust in our institutions is through transparency. Why do it this way?
I agree with you, Chris. And this is the agreement that the minority and majority had together through conversations. I do like the idea of a deposition better than a regular hearing because there is more time and there's more time to get into depth with a lot of these questions rather than just 5-minute clips here and there. I would welcome the press to be in there, but this is the agreement that was made, and that's the way we are going to finish these depositions. I am all for transparency. So you're not going to hear an argument from me about closed door anything. I loved it when we had the speakers fight right there in front of the American public, and that wasn't a closed door meeting. It was right there for everyone to debate, for all to see. And that's how I believe the government should work. And this is how you end up with really swampy, bad deals for the American people all around. So I'm with you, but this is the agreement that was made.
All right. Suhas, come on in on this. What did you learn today in the room with the former Secretary of State?
Yeah, we didn't learn much. I mean, she sent us a sworn declaration that she'd never met the guy, that she didn't really have a relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell. And that's what she said over and over and over again for basically 7 hours. And so, we didn't learn anything. And I think as far as transparency, I think it would have been great to have the press come in. And they asked for the press to come in. We in the minority have been asking for this to be a public hearing. Let's make it a public deposition then. Let's make tomorrow's deposition of Bill Clinton public because he wants to do it. Anyone who's willing to talk to us publicly, let's allow them to do that instead of doing it behind closed doors. This was a majority decision to do that. And the minority, we've been wanting this to be public because the Clintons were willing to make it public.
Now, what do you think you need in this situation? I feel like it's been ignored. Why aren't you guys calling for the Attorney General to explain why so much was redacted, why the law wasn't followed? Most recently, with what we're being told, I can't substantiate it, but that allegations that involved President Trump were removed and put back and maybe changed. Doesn't that have to be explained?
Well, the Attorney General is violating the law, right? We passed a law that was signed in December saying you had to release all of the files, right? So, she went before the Judiciary Committee and she just evaded the question the whole time and just attacked members of the committee. But I would like her to come before us. We actually tried to hold her in contempt too. If you're going to hold the Clintons in contempt, hold her in contempt as well, right? Because she's covering up just as much. Hold other people who have not been responsive or given us more in contempt. But that's not what's happening. I think we need to stop playing politics, partisan politics with this, and treat everyone the same to get to the answers that we need.
Let me ask you something, and Suhas, and I'm going to ask you the same thing, Lauren. There's the old adage, the cops say, hey, you, stop. And the guy runs. And then they chase him down and they grab him. He goes, I didn't do anything. They say, well, why did you run? That is one version of why Bondi removed information about allegations against President Trump. The other version of it is the end of that story that we never hear, which is the guy says, stop. He runs. They catch him. He says, I didn't do anything. They say, why did you run? And he says, because I know what you guys do to people that you catch. That is the second version, that the reason that they may have finessed some of the allegations against President Trump is because they know you guys are on a jihad to take them down. What do you think of that suggestion?
If the president did nothing wrong and has nothing to hide, then he should release all of the files. It's as simple as that, but that's not what has happened. In fact, he's done the opposite. He has not been transparent with the American people. Now we have evidence that some of the files not released was stuff about him. So again, if he did nothing wrong, then just release the files. You can protect victims in doing so, but there's 2.5 million files here, and not all of them are protecting victims. The victims themselves have said that.
Lauren, is it unfair of me to say, if there was a D after this guy's name instead of an R as President of the United States, and you learned that the sitting Attorney General had removed some allegations and then put them back, wouldn't you be jumping up and down?
Well, we are looking to see if things were removed. We've also heard from the victims directly who exonerated President Trump, saying that he did nothing wrong. Also, President Trump answers questions from the press on this very topic regularly. Hours of questions have been asked of him, and this is something that he answers to the press. He talks to the press on a daily basis. So President Trump isn't somewhere where we cannot reach him, cannot hear from him, cannot have him explain. I think that is much different than folks who are unreachable, who take 7 months to actually comply with our committee while we are trying to work in good faith with them to get responses and get their participation. So that is a category with President Trump. And Chris, this is not a bipartisan issue for me. This is about women who were trafficked. This is important to me.
Understood.
And I want whoever was involved in this to be held accountable. There have been victims who came before the Oversight Committee and have had press conferences at the United States Capitol that said President Trump did nothing wrong. So he has been exonerated by some of those victims. And if there is more that is going to come out, then let it come out. I want everything released in totality. You know, you've already heard the frustrations that many of us are having. Even when we go to the DOJ, there are redactions under the redactions. The files that we are supposed to see redacted, and we aren't looking for very inappropriate images of children, but there are names that we want to see. And
Right.
and that is very problematic for me as well. I have been talking with the DOJ about getting those released, and there still needs to be more information to come out on this.
I challenge you on 2 points. One is that he takes questions about this all the time. He hasn't told us anything except what he wants to tell us, which the president is very good at designing his message and repeating.
Too.
Look, that's what pros do. I mean, especially in a deposition setting. That's why I don't know why you do it this way. Anybody who's sophisticated, who's sitting next to their attorney, is going to answer questions in a very specific way about this. But, you know, the president's saying, the second point that I challenge is he hasn't been exonerated. Exonerated means that we have reviewed the facts and you are, in fact, innocent. Not we can't make the case, not there's not enough proof, but you literally did nothing wrong. We do not know that about him or really anybody.
And I'm just saying,
and
in the opinion of these victims that told us he did nothing wrong. So I'm not saying in a court of law he was exonerated.
To them. To them, I'm saying, you know what I mean? Like, to them, that may well be their truth. Fine. How do we get to the bottom of what's going on by asking Hillary Clinton about UFOs and Pizzagate, Lauren?
Well, you know, those topics did come up, and there are things within the Epstein file that leads to these questions. These files open up a whole mess, a whole trove of questions to go down. And, you know, Hillary Clinton being connected so tightly with John Podesta, who's connected with Anthony Weiner, and all of these things, they all kind of tie together, especially when you're talking about women who are being trafficked. So this isn't to highlight some big vast conspiracy about a pizza parlor, but I think there needs to be questions, and I asked some questions on this topic that should be explained. There wasn't an explanation given, of course, and then other members
about
certainly
Pizzagate?
asked about UFOs. I'm sorry?
And UFOs? Like, what did you want to know about UFOs and Pizzagate?
Well, I think everybody
that
wants
would
to know
matter
about
to survivors?
UFOs. I did not ask that question, but I mean, there certainly are questions out there, and there was connections within the Epstein files that led to those questions. There are 3 million files there. You can go a lot of different ways with
I know,
the
but it's
information
like,
that's in there.
You know, if we want people to take this seriously and believe it's not a fishing expedition,
She actually
it's like
seemed
somewhere
pretty inquisitive
Suhas,
about it. She was
Listen,
interested herself.
I'm sure she is. As long as it doesn't involve her, why not be interested? But Suhas, I feel like somewhere Kevin Bacon is like looking over his shoulder because he's going to get connected to this also. Do you have to be careful about how far down the rabbit hole you go with this?
I just want to get all the evidence out. If you're talking about the Epstein case generally, we don't know how deep it goes to begin with. We're not just talking about sex trafficking, although that's horrible, but we're now talking about financial crimes. We're talking about state secrets being shared, talking about heads of state and former heads of states, all over the world. This is really bad stuff, and I think the public wants to know how the cover-up was able to happen and how we can prevent it from ever happening again. So I think we need to go as deep as we can and let the facts be out there and let the people decide, and maybe let the courts decide if we need to press charges against people.
Right. Well, you're going to have trouble with that because of the statute of limitations. You guys would have to come together and draft
Let's
a
change
look-back
that,
statute.
though. We've got laws to change that now, or at least propose.
I'm on board. Let's do it.
On the state level, but you got to be careful with look-back statutes because they can be abused. I mean, you got to have prosecutorial discretion here, which is why I don't love hearing about Pizzagate and UFOs, because there's enough real stuff. You guys should be bringing in Deutsche Bank and the other banks that made settlements. Why would banks be making settlements with survivors of sexual assault? And why did Epstein get a pass on Tower Financial, the biggest Ponzi scheme before Madoff? Why did it all happen? You know, that's where I'm saying the focus should be on this stuff. That's the part. All right, I'm getting yelled at. I got to go. You see, I'm very interested into it.
Well,
also.
we're not done subpoenas, so.
Yes, 100%. Look, you use the tools you have because they're not going to do it willingly, right? These guys have been quiet and got away with it, and some women too, for a very long time. Suhas Subramaniam, you're always welcome here to make your case. Lauren, I don't play favorites, but I also don't play cheap. I don't care about the photo. I really don't. I asked you about it. It's my job to do it. I do care about the Pizzagate and the UFOs a little bit. It's like, this is really serious. I think it really matters to the American people. You know, keep that in mind,
all of it matters,
man. Epstein matters to people because, remember, the real fight in this country isn't right-left. That's artificial. No disrespect. It's top-bottom. That's the real fight. And this is proving that there is a top that has a different set of rules. That's why it matters so much to people, my opinion.
You're so
Lauren,
right.
Thank you very much. Suhas, as always, I know you had a long day. Last thing you want to do is look at my face.
All right, now that we've seen that exchange play out in full, there are a few things that really stand out. Because what you just watched wasn't simply a disagreement between two people on television. It was a clear example of how political narratives can collide with basic facts in real time, and how quickly serious investigations can get pulled off track when the conversation starts drifting into speculation instead of evidence. The first thing that Chris Cuomo pushed back on was the claim that Donald Trump had somehow been exonerated by victims connected to the Epstein case. That word matters a lot. In legal terms, exoneration means that evidence has been reviewed and it has been affirmatively determined that a person did nothing wrong. It's not the same thing as saying there isn't enough evidence to charge someone, and it's definitely not the same thing as saying that some individuals believe the person is innocent. Exoneration usually comes after a legal process where investigators examine the facts and formally clear someone of wrongdoing. In the Epstein situation, that process hasn't happened for most of the people whose names have appeared in documents or testimony over the years. Jeffrey Epstein himself was arrested in 2019 on federal sex trafficking charges involving minors. Prosecutors allege that he operated a network in which underage girls were recruited and abused at several of his properties. Epstein died in federal custody later that year while awaiting trial, which meant the criminal case against him never reached a courtroom verdict. However, the investigation into his network did not end there. One of the most significant developments in the aftermath of Epstein's arrest was the prosecution of his longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell was arrested in July 2020 and charged with multiple counts related to sex trafficking and conspiracy. After a high-profile federal trial in New York, she was convicted in December 2021 and later sentenced to 20 years in prison. That conviction confirmed in court that Epstein's trafficking operation was real, and that victims had indeed been abused within that system. Because of that conviction and the many civil lawsuits filed by victims, the Epstein case expanded far beyond the actions of one individual. Over time, thousands of pages of court documents, depositions, and witness statements have surfaced. Those documents include references to many powerful figures from politics, business, and entertainment. However, it's important to understand that being mentioned in those files does not automatically mean someone committed a crime. In many instances, it simply means investigators recorded contact, association, or travel involving Epstein or his associates. That distinction is exactly why Cuomo pushed back when Boowbert described Trump as exonerated. There has been no legal process that formally cleared every public figure whose name appears in those materials. At the same time, there also hasn't been evidence sufficient for prosecutors to bring charges against many of them. In other words, the situation is more complicated than either side of the political debate often suggests. The second moment in the interview that caught Cuomo's attention was the sudden shift into topics like UFOs and Pizzagate during a discussion that was supposed to focus on the Epstein investigation. That moment illustrates something that happens frequently in political hearings and media appearances. When the scope of an investigation becomes extremely broad, it can start pulling in unrelated theories, allegations, and speculation. Once that happens, it becomes much harder for the public to separate legitimate lines of inquiry from distractions. The Epstein case is already one of the most complex criminal investigations in recent history. It involves financial crimes, trafficking allegations, international travel, and connections to numerous wealthy and influential individuals. Investigators and journalists have spent years trying to piece together how Epstein's operation functioned and why it went unchecked for so long. Because of that complexity, many legal experts argue that the most productive approach is to focus on verifiable evidence, financial records, witness testimony, court documents, and investigative findings, rather than chasing unrelated conspiracy theories. That's essentially the point Cuomo was making toward the end of the exchange. He wasn't saying that every question should be off limits. What he was saying is that when lawmakers start talking about UFOs or internet conspiracy theories in the middle of an investigation involving human trafficking victims, it risks undermining the seriousness of the inquiry itself. If the goal is to rebuild public trust and uncover the truth about Epstein's network, then the investigation needs to stay grounded in evidence rather than speculation. The broader issue here is public confidence in institutions. Over the past decade, trust in government investigations and major institutions has declined significantly. Many Americans believe powerful people are protected from accountability, while others believe investigations are driven by political motives. That environment makes it incredibly difficult for the public to agree on what counts as credible information. When discussions about serious crimes become mixed with partisan narratives or conspiracy theories, that trust gap often grows even wider. At the same time, the Epstein scandal raised legitimate questions about how someone with such extensive connections managed to avoid serious consequences for so many years. Epstein had relationships with billionaires, politicians, academics, and royalty. He owned properties around the world and moved within elite social circles. When the details of his trafficking operation became public, many people began asking whether those connections helped shield him from scrutiny earlier in his life. Those questions are why transparency continues to be such a major theme in discussions about the Epstein files. Victims' advocates and investigators have repeatedly argued that releasing more documents and information could help clarify who knew what and when. However, courts and law enforcement agencies also face legal limits on what can be disclosed, particularly when documents involve sealed testimony, ongoing investigations, or the privacy rights of victims. That balance between transparency and legal constraints is one of the reasons the Epstein files remain such a controversial topic today. Some people believe that releasing everything would expose wrongdoing by powerful figures, while others worry that unfiltered releases could spread misinformation or damage people who were never involved in crimes. So when you step back and look at the interview you just watched, what you're really seeing is a snapshot of that larger debate. On one side, there are politicians and commentators demanding more information and accountability. On the other side, there are concerns about how investigations are being framed and whether the conversation is drifting away from verifiable facts. And that's why Cuomo's pushback in this interview stood out. He wasn't simply arguing with a politician. He was trying to draw a line between evidence-based discussion and speculation. In a case as sensitive as Epstein's, one involving real victims and serious crimes, that distinction matters a lot. Now that you've seen the exchange and heard the breakdown, I'm curious what you think about it. Do you believe discussions like this help move the investigation forward, or do they risk turning a serious issue into political theater? And when it comes to the Epstein files, how much information should actually be released to the public? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you want more breakdowns of political interviews and debates like this one, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.